what is the next big step now that we have gotten rid of all those single-use plastic bags? We're talking balloons. Balloon releases are basically a powder keg of litter. And it's time that we got rid of that practice. And it's kind of shocking that it's gone on sort of unchecked for this long. We have two fabulous speakers today to jumpstart this conversation. Zach Klein is the policy attorney for Clean Ocean Action, born and raised in North Jersey, because we always got to keep the good ones. Zach earned his undergraduate degree from George Washington University, graduated from Boston College Law School, and then spent 2 years as a law fellow for the National Sea Grant Law Center at University of Mississippi. He resides in Red Bank. That's where my best friend and college roommate lives, with his girlfriend Amelia and their two dogs, Buddy and Dexter. Zach's role today is to provide an overview of balloon release programs across the country. John Weber is then going to give us the status on balloon bans at the local front. John joined the Surfrider Foundation staff in 2005 as the first employee on the East Coast after volunteering for many years. He is now the Mid-Atlantic Regional Manager and assists the Surfrider Foundation chapters from New York to Virginia, and has helped in plastics campaign and balloon releases, and is a member of the New Jersey Plastics Advisory Council. John's been a volunteer on the planning board in Bradley Beach, the Environmental Commission, and is also a town council member in Bradley Beach. So gentlemen, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you so much, Joanne. Wanted to start first by thanking you for organizing this conference and for this panel in particular. This is a topic that Clean Ocean Action does a lot of work on for good reason, as you heard from my colleague Allison Joan during her presentation just a few moments ago. I also wanted to thank you for sharing those incredible videos. Those students should be incredibly proud of themselves. There's lots of kudos being shared in the chat, rightfully so. Those were really, really great. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get my presentation started. Here we go, and I'll get presentation mode underway. Like Joanne said, my name is Zachary Klein. I'm the policy attorney for Clean Ocean Action, and I'm here today to cover state-level balloon release bans around the US, a bird's eye view of where these laws are at the state level as opposed to the municipal level around the country. So first and foremost, this is a topic that's been on people's radars here in the US for decades now at this point. And there were a couple states that ended up being trailblazers on this topic who acted on it when it first started coming on people's radars as an environmental concern back in the late 80s and early 90s. Those 4 states are Connecticut, Florida, Tennessee, and California. I won't go bullet point by bullet point here, but in broad strokes, what's important to consider is that these bans tend to focus more so on the mass release of balloons, 10 or more in Connecticut and Florida, although you see differing amounts of the dollar fines there, 75 in Connecticut, 250 in Florida. Tennessee defines the mass release of balloons as 25 or more balloons in a day. A $250 fine accompanies that. And then California is a little unique. They specifically ban the release of balloons that are made of electrically conductive material as part of a public event, promotion, etc., product advertisement. Those violations you also see are accompanied by a $100 fine, and after the 3rd violation, that's upgraded to a misdemeanor. And although you see a picture here of balloons in the sea, which is a very powerful image, that is absolutely litter that could become eaten by marine life. It could, nothing good comes of balloons like that, especially that many in the ocean. That's a picture we took here in New Jersey. California, coming back to the point I mentioned, because they were concerned not only about the environmental risks that were posed at face value, but also in the spirit of being trailblazers. There was also concern there from the beginning about the threat posed by balloons when they become entangled in electrical wires, whether that means power outages or causing wildfires. It's absolutely a concern in other states as well, but as I'm sure many of the people on this chat are already familiar with, there are unique problems when it comes to power outages and wildfires in California that added a particular flavor, a nuance, an angle to that bill that you didn't necessarily see in some of these other trailblazing states. And then after years, decades of only having those 4 states with laws on the books about balloon release bans, we move on to 2021, which ended up being a really big year for balloon release bans here in the US. 6 different states passed laws that in some form or another prohibited the release of balloons. And what's interesting here as we move from the last slide to this one is that the trailblazers tended to focus on the mass release of balloons, 10 balloons or more, 5 balloons or more. Here in 2021, there was recognition that even the release of 1 balloon posed an issue. And they certainly upgraded the punishments that accompanied the release of mass balloons, recognizing that that itself is a stronger, a more intense problem that requires greater incentive to combat. Here you see pretty close to home for us here in New Jersey that Delaware passed a law that separated punishment for the release of 1 to 4 balloons as opposed to 5 or more. Maryland passed a law. Virginia, I'd like to highlight theirs, was a pretty simple $25 fine per balloon, no matter the number of balloons. And they provided a blanket exception for federal and state agencies there. And that's a little unique because in all the other examples we're going to talk about today that we have talked about, the exemptions there tend to be pretty specific in that they exempt balloons that are released for meteorological purposes or pursuant to a government contract. So there's good reason to make sure that federal agencies, that state agencies are able to release balloons in some circumstances, but by making the exemption so broad there, they effectively allowed state agencies, if they so chose, to have balloons at an outside party or event, which whether or not agencies are taking advantage of that loophole, I can't say for sure. The law has only been on the books for a year as it is, but that is something to be careful about as we consider language that might help ensure that the spirit of these balloon release bans are fulfilled to their highest potential. The other 3 states that passed balloon release bans last year were Rhode Island, Hawaii, and Maine. Hawaii and Maine in particular were considered 2 of the strictest, the toughest balloon release laws that were passed last year. Hawaii has a $500 fine per offense, although there you'll see that multiple balloons being released at one time still counts as one offense. So you could release 10 balloons, theory, I suppose 100 balloons, $500 fine. Still a big fine, but not necessarily distinguishing the number of balloons in a significant way. Maine, you'll see, hits pretty hard, both when it comes to smaller balloon release events, 1 to 10, which are accompanied by pretty steep fines. And then you'll see that the release of more than 10 balloons is also accompanied by very, very severe fines. And this begs the question, what is the status of balloon release laws here in New Jersey? And the answer there is that there have been some proposals in the legislature, but they haven't actually passed yet. Most recently, we've seen a few different proposals come to light. One was from Senator Declan O'Scanlan in the Senate that would have accompanied release of balloons by a $500 violation, similar to Hawaii, where the release of multiple balloons at one time would be considered one violation. There was another bill very similar to that first bill I mentioned, This one, there's an asterisk next to the word sponsor there because there have been variations of this bill. Assemblyman McKeon, who's listed there, hasn't been the sole sponsor for all of them, but he does seem to be one of the common threads, perhaps the common thread. And, you know, very similar to that first bill, $500 fine per violation. And then Senator Hotaling also had a bill that was accompanied, sorry, about skipping ahead there, by a $1,000 fine for the release of not only a balloon, but any other floating device. And it would have been accompanied by a $2,000 fine for failing to recover tethered balloons and floating devices. So those are the two big distinctions of Assemblyman Hotaling's bill there. One, that it would have covered not only balloons, but other floating devices, which could pose similar issues. And then also two, that it explicitly covers the tethering of balloons and failing to recover balloons that might become untethered. So finally, this begs the question, what is Clean Ocean Action's preferred language? This is a picture, unfortunately, that Clean Ocean Action took of a balloon at Sandy Hook not too long ago. So definitely an issue that hits close to home. And as far as we see it, our preferred language would apply to both balloons and other floating devices. It would cover not only the intentional release of balloons, but also failing to collect balloons and other devices that become untethered. And one of the big distinctions between our preferred language and the language that you just saw in Assemblyman Hotaling's bill is that Clean Ocean Action would also like to require retailers of balloons and these other floating devices to display a sign at the point of sale or at the point of display in the store that notifies purchasers of the ban, and ideally might even go farther to explain that it poses this environmental risk, the release of balloons. And so our language that we're still shopping around now, the penalties would be, as you see there, in the $100 to $500 range, depending on the offense. So that is the current status of where balloon ban proposals stand in New Jersey and around the country more generally. Maybe we'll pass it off to John now, and I'll take questions together with him at the end, if that makes the most sense. So without further ado, John Weber.
Thanks, Zach. I really appreciate it. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm gonna assume that's a yes. So like I said, thanks, Jack and Zach, and thanks, Joanne, for putting us on the panel here. This is really great. And thanks, everybody can hear me good. I'm going to talk about the local balloon laws and share my screen here real quickly. I do want to tell you a little bit of an origin story on how it came that we worked on so many local balloon laws. In the Down Beach section, if people don't know what Down Beach is, these are the towns south of Atlantic City. So that's Ventnor, Margate, and Longport. They're working together on their green team to do stuff about plastic bags, actually, and possibly other plastics. And they're all working together and seeing if they could get this is years ago, to get a bag law passed locally. But in that process of working on plastic bags and other plastics, they noticed that the city of Margate had a law against balloons, and it was already on the books, and it was against intentionally releasing balloons, and it was already on the books, and it looked like it had been there for years. And with a little bit of research, they figured out that a former mayor a while back was just a charter captain, a charter boat captain, or he had a big vessel that he took out there, and he would always see balloons, big bunches of balloons out there, and he just came back and passed a law, and that was great news. The Down Beach green teams continued to work on getting laws for plastic bags, but it gave them the idea, why can't we ban the intentional release of balloons here as well? So that started, at least in South Jersey, rolling some of these other local balloon laws. And what I have here is simply a map of New Jersey, roughly divided in north to south, as you can see. I hope the resolution there is good enough. And if people want, we can have a robust debate about where the dividing line is between North and South Jersey. But for the purpose of fitting it on my slide, here it is. So you can see there's a handful of towns. New Milford's up in Bergen County, and then a bunch of towns closer to the shore: Tinton Falls, Asbury Park, Bradley Beach, Point Pleasant Beach. I don't know how New Milford came about. They just did this on their own. I know that Surfrider Foundation had something to do. Oh, and I'm going to add Long Branch to this list, which was a little more recent, but I know Surfrider Foundation had something to do with getting it passed in Asbury Park and Bradley Beach and Long Branch, which is really great news. And then to randomly decide where South Jersey starts. Here we go with the South Jersey, a lot more towns in South Jersey and many, many more coastal towns, as you can see. I'm not going to read through the whole list here. Mount Laurel being the one, one inland, and Egg Harbor City a little bit more inland. But once we got Long Beach Township, which is most of Long Beach Island, and then to go geographically, Brigantine is on the list, and Atlantic City is on their list. And I feel like Atlantic City did it on their own just because their neighbors were doing it. And then once you get past Atlantic City, we've got those down beach towns: Ventnor, Margate, Longport. So there's this really big, long stretch of towns in South Jersey that have all banned the intentional release of balloons all the way down, almost all the way down into Cape May City. So the reality is that these local ordinances banning the intentional release of balloons is deceptively, it's just deceptively simple. Legislation can get long and complicated and many paged bills and stuff, but these are typically 1 or 2 paragraph, 1 or 2 page as maximum laws that simply ban the intentional release of balloons in that town. There's always an exception for weather balloons, scientific research or anything like that. I'll just see that, and an exemption for hot air balloons as well. And the fines vary by town, but that's understandable. But they're all very, very simple, and to get them passed has been rather simple as well. It's just typically if a handful of people bring this to the town, either through their green team, their environmental commission, or just bring it to a local elected official, you can show the list of towns that are already doing this. And again, I think it's maybe a few more than that slide. That slide was made a couple of years ago before we started working on the statewide law. And simply a few people with some well-reasoned logic, maybe a brief statement or two at a couple of council meetings, and then boom, you have a law banning the intentional release of balloons. I see Joanne's done a fantastic job. There's over 200 people on this call. I'm probably representing approximately that many towns. It would be fantastic if we could get, if we could just double the amount of towns that have a local balloon law. And as Zach said, we've had some efforts on a statewide law. You'd think if 20-something towns did it, that would be enough to get the state to take action. Obviously, that we haven't crossed the finish line on that yet. So I'm going to make the case for redoubling efforts at the local levels. And again, if we got 200 towns on here, I think it should be pretty easy to double the amount of towns with a law banning the intentional release of balloons. So if we can get up more like 40 or 50 towns, I think that really gives us a lot more impetus on the state level for passing such a law. I will say one thing. I think in this process of doing the state law, we learned how we could improve these local laws, because as Zach pointed out, one of the things that we liked in a recent version of the state law, which didn't pass, but is to include tethering of balloons. How realtors are famous for this, to bring attention to an open house sign, just tethering to a street pole or some kind of sign or something like that. I think a local law, I think it'd be great to include the tethering of balloons, that maybe that they can't be left out overnight or something like that. So just make sure that anybody that tethered them can just go and get them. And then I think the other item that would be a good improvement, even on a local law, is this idea of some kind of education at point of sale. Just, even if it's just a little, some kind of sign similar to what we had in the state law saying, like, for a place that sells balloons, just letting people know that the intentional release of balloons is not allowed in this town. So these are all laws about the intentional release of balloons. I will say, again, I help Surf Rider Foundation chapters up and down the mid-Atlantic, New York to Virginia. So I will say that in New York, they have taken the next step in the town of East Hampton. That's basically the eastern end of Long Island. And they've taken the next step, and they have actually banned the sale of balloons. And that's maybe the next frontier. And I think, I think we're successful on this local level, because once we get on the state level, there is this thing called the Balloon Council. And once we're talking about passing a state law, this gets on the Balloon Council's radar. And, I don't have evidence that they're actually lobbying against this, but I would imagine that they're lobbying against this. They're the Balloon Council. They're looking out for the interests of people who sell balloons and people who make balloons and whatever. But when we keep it to the local level, the Balloon Council is a statewide organization, a nationwide organization, actually located in New Jersey and Trenton. But when we keep it on the local level, it's kind of hard to keep track of 565 different towns. So I think they have a really great shot of getting a lot more towns in New Jersey to pass a local ban on the intentional release of balloons, and that should be a great step for us to get a statewide law, and then we can join all these other mid-Atlantic states that have done it and other states around the country that have done it. So I will leave the rest of the time for questions. I'll go stop sharing here. And anything about local laws, or I know there was a question before about local concerts. If people want to ask that question, that's fine. I'm happy to take that and explain what Allison meant when she mentioned that. But thanks again, everybody, for being here listening. Thanks again to Joanne for having us, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you, guys. That was excellent. But I just want to say before we move on, we really only have time for one question. But I know a lot of you are saying how do I make this happen? So we've already thought about that. We've talked about it. We're going to be we're going to find the 3 best model ordinances in New Jersey, and we're going to post them on our best practices. You know me, I'm always about the carrot. We're also going to be giving 3 certification credits for anyone who advocates to get this on, to get a balloon release ban going in their town. I don't want to ban the practice of selling balloons. I got way too much hate mail last year over plastic bags. So I need a little love coming into 2022. I just posted preventballoonlitter.org in the chat. We don't have time to show the video I was going to show, but they have a great free video in English and Spanish just to encourage different celebrations in lieu of balloon releases. So Carol, we can do one question.
Okay, one quick question. For the most part, who is charged with enforcement for the balloon regulations for these local ordinances? Is it police departments or others?
Yeah, so in some cases, that's going to end up being a decision of the town. But if it's a town ordinance and the town wants to have, say, whoever would enforce, their other plastic laws. I mean, in some cases, it's going to be their code enforcer. And again, realizing it's hard to catch somebody in the act of doing this, right? This is why the education is really key. So towns could decide to have their police forces do it. They could decide to have their code enforcers do it. But I will say one thing, like in beach towns, especially, a lot of people come to us for permits. They want to have events and things like that. And we've just made it part of our permit process to like remind them we have a no intentional release of balloons, and this just maybe gets it out of people's minds if they ever thought in relation to an event. Doesn't prevent the single person coming down and letting a balloon go for possibly no good reason. But hard to catch in the act. But I think it's really up to the town how they want to enforce that. Could be a code person though.
That's a great takeaway, John, making it part of your permit. I say that about recycling and all that good stuff. So that's definitely something to write down on your pad and paper as a takeaway for today.